really what I'm going to talk about is, essentially, I started with a pencil, and now I use any number of kind of digital styluses and different things. So it's really about that sort of transition, which has been about 15 years of my working life, so the kind of fair majority of it, you know. And so I've worked on a variety of projects set in periods from 600 AD to present day, and I'm a production designer, so my job is to try and create, to help directors and writers create an illusion of time and space. And I'll just get on some. So I'm going to flick through a few different projects to give you kind of an idea. This is from Legend, which is a film starring Tom Hardy, and it's based on the Cray twins. It's another retelling of that story, and Tom Hardy plays both twins, and I'll talk about, we had a motion capture and various sort of motion control cameras to help do that, and I'll talk about that in a second. So these are just various, that's an illustration that I did for a nightclub that's in the scene. That's a close-up of Tom Hardy and Emily Browning, who is a young Australian actress. I think this will bring a lot of attention to her, this particular film. So a designer has a lot of interlocking roles. You have to balance the needs of the script to the budget, and you've got to oversee the detailed designs and the construction, and it's not just one person, there's lots and lots of assistants. So I'd have draftspeople helping to either old-fashioned hand drawings or with, nowadays, with computer-aided design. Graphic artists like Annie Atkins has worked with me quite a lot to do all the kind of background graphics and even, you know, printing wallpapers or ancient frescoes, things like that. So there's a whole heap of people. Obviously all the, when you're building, for instance, this thing on the screen at the moment is a bomb site that we built into very luckily, we found a gap in some old houses. It was actually a street going in fact, it was bombed during World War II, and this is a little scene showing the guys as kids, kind of giving them a bit of a background to their life, and that was the final product. So, you know, all of that is, let's see, yeah, all of the section is constructed and put in. So on any film, you'll have, you know, either on this particular film, we maybe had 20 to 30 carpenters and painters and plasterers and people like that. On other projects, you might have up to 60, 70, depending on the scale of the project, or even more. That was a visual for a hotel scene where the American mafia come to London, and that's the how we shot it. And you can see there's green screen outside, and I just saw a screening last week of the film, and they had they put in all the visual effects, which unfortunately I can't show you that yet. But so there's the London vista beyond there. So there's a number of these interlocking roles, but at the heart, the purposes are identical. It's really, you've got to oversee various things, seek locations, but it's really to kind of try and engage the audience emotionally and to transport their imaginations to a specific time and a place. And the art direction can inform the thematic currents of a film, either very directly or very subtly. So for instance, the next one, this is Crossbones, a US TV series, and it stars John Malkovich as Blackbeard, and but set on a fictional island called Santa Campana, where they set up a kind of proto-republic. And it was sort of based on the actual pirate film. The pirate ships actually were, they had a democratic kind of regime on them. They would elect their captains and their quartermasters, and they would divide all the booty equally. So this project sort of riffs on that and imagines an island that they've settled and that they do a similar thing. And that's an illustration of the sort of layout of the part of the kind of town that we built. It was filmed in the Caribbean in Puerto Rico. So that's a kind of example as a fairly, that's another sort of visualization I did for it to sort of show some of the background extensions. So it was filmed in bits and pieces. So the house in the very, very top background and all of that kind of sections were put in afterwards. And that's the real set. And we had plenty of ships. And then at the end of this, I'll show you some of the visual effects at the and how there was a sort of interaction between the real sets and the real and the visual effects. Because filming, especially on a television schedule with ships, there were some very, very practical considerations, namely that filming with big old ships is very, very, very slow. I mean, it's great fun, it's lovely. I had a great time, but one thing that we quickly realized that if we put the sails down in most cases, it would just take too long, and also the sails would get in the way of the sun, and the cameraman wanted the light in a certain direction, and lots of sort of things. So in the end, for some of the scenes, we actually decided to keep the sails all furled up, and they were put in afterwards. And again, I'll show you. I have a little reel that we can show all that later. These were one of the few occasions the real sails were used, and as is that one. And that's just a little sort of shot of the land. And obviously we cleaned up the television aerial and stuff like that, or the broadcasting aerial in the background. Another thing, as I was saying, you know, an art direction can inform the thematic currents of a film, either very directly, or it can be unobtrusive and register in a subtle and subliminal way, class, learning, the status of a character, perhaps. Designers create illusions of time and space, and I always think of, there's a saying that Alfred Hitchcock said many years ago. He, interestingly, started as an art director in London, was an art director for many years before he was a designer. And one of his famous sayings is that never forget the screen is flat. And even as Donald Clark was talking earlier about 3D and stuff like that, you know, the screen is still flat. And as a designer, that's always something I have to think about. You know, how can we kind of help create illusions of space and depth, especially. This was a visualization for Blackbeard's kind of lair. The script called for a cadaver stripped of all of its flesh, and there is the poor guy that we got in the end. Actually happens to be a medical model that enterprising company in America makes these very realistic models for surgeons to train on. So we got a little bit of product placement there, and they Sindava is their name, if anybody ever wants one. They cost about $50,000. But I've never inquired, but they may well have them in the medical schools here. These are some scenes from Vikings. Excuse me. Yeah, so one of the, when you're doing a period drama, one of the, especially something like Vikings, which was set, obviously, kind of about real people, although some of the characters were amalgamated, and some of the timelines were amalgamated by Michael Hurst, the writer. But obviously, one of the first things is to research the historical details. So one of the big changes for me has been, before I would have had to physically go to museums, to libraries, to when I still do that, and I still think there's a sort of serendipity in going to a research library and coming across something that you just may not happen to have even be looking for, but send you in a different way. And I think that's all still good and not to be lost. But researching is now much more easy because essentially I was able to scour all the museums in Scandinavia and get the plans of the archaeological plans of the old boats and things like this. We actually built this boat. We built a number of boats, but in the first year when we made the project, we built. I'll go back to that one. We built 2 versions of this. One was for a gimbal, so we could use it for, against green screen for various effects that we did. And the other was a proper sailing boat, and it did. It wouldn't win any races, but it sort of sailed up and down lakes, under its own sort of power, though we did have a little small outboard engine on it to give it some propulsion and to get it into the right position for a take, things like that. Although one time the second unit went out and did a whole load of shooting with it, and to get the light in the right way and the right angle, they used the outboard engine. And then I looked at all the rushes that night, and the sail was all backwards, the wrong way around, So then it ended up being a visual effects shot to replace the sail, to take it out, and it would have been better not to have the sail because it's easier to add in things and take out things. So that turned into a bit of a nightmare. So basically the internet has just allowed me to research not just details, but do virtual tours of museums. But I still go to, obviously whenever I can on a particular project, I'll go to either a real place if it exists, to the ruins of the place, or for instance, the Tudors. I toured, I think, every castle within sort of a 60-mile radius of London for about there was a little kind of pre-production period where I brought my little son along he was only about 3 or 4 at the time, so he's seen a lot of castles. This was a part of the village. We built the village of, or the town of Kattegat, partly on a lakeside, this little sort of dock area that we built down in Loughlore in County Wicklow, in Loch Tay. And then for practical filming reasons, we built some of the sort of interior of the town, so to speak, on the backlot in the new Ashford studios. And this is a little aspect showing of it. I need to whiz through some of these because I'm sort of slightly behind in my little schedule. That's a bit more of the Kattegat sort of docking area. This was Brexton Pluto, and shot in something like, I think, 97 different locations between Kilkenny, Callan in County Kilkenny, Dublin, Belfast, and London, and a certain amount of studio work in Ardmore as well. And I think that was built as a set in an industrial estate somewhere in Dublin. And that was a location. But art direction is about details too. And for instance, in this one, this was for Titanic, Blood and Steel, which is on Netflix if you want to look it up. And that was Irish-Italian co-production. So that was my illustration of it, of the particular scene, and this is the scene. So this was about kind of a slightly odd way into the whole story, but quite compelling, about a metallurgist. And so he's testing the metal that's going on to Titanic, to building the ship. And he's kind of the sort of character that brings you through the building of the ship. And it's all about the building of the ship and the kind of hubris that's there. making it bigger and better, and the various compromises that the screenwriters sort of felt that they made along the way, not just in lifeboats, but in the actual construction of the project. And then this is I use a lot of 3D modeling software to visualize scenes, and especially in something like this, I think it was 1,100 feet long, so there's no way we were going to build anything approaching that. So that's what we built, and that's what the concept was. And Windmill Lane here in Ireland did the fantastic visual effects to fill out that whole thing. Oops. But sometimes things have to be done for real. If you see from the scale of the chap below, that was actually quite a big thing. I think it was about sort of 20 foot across, made out of fiberglass. But for all the jigs and reels, we felt it was better for our scene to build it for real, and got some fantastic model makers to make it as light as we could. The real thing would be incredibly heavy because it was made of bronze. It's just some more. That's another illustration for a scene done down near Guinness's. That's a follow on from that. And then that's a little subplot of an Italian family who are plasterers living in in Belfast, and their daughter is a draftswoman in Harland and Wolff. And this is the Tudors. The sort of thing that another little thread I want to kind of tie in that people wouldn't normally think of is one huge big difference to me is the big changeover from film, from 35mm to digital, which is nearly everywhere now. And there'll be a lot of people who'll mourn, and part of me does mourn some of the sort of aesthetic kind of looks you get from 35mm. But what it has done, for good or for bad, it's opened up a lot of art direction possibilities in terms of shooting, I think, much more perhaps atmospheric sets. So for instance, the Tudors, we had a digital camera. It started off, I think, as a Genesis one, and then I think by the end it was the Alexa, or maybe not, maybe it was the Genesis, but there were different iterations as we went every year, because it ran for 4 years. But it really meant that these new cameras just have such latitude with exposure, especially in the shadows and also in the highlights, that they're able to kind of sets and locations can be lit with far less light and energy. And also the other part of the equation is that at the other end of the post-production process, there's a huge amount of manipulation can happen as well. So, sometimes I look at rushes and think, oh, it's overexposed or underexposed, but there's an amazing amount of information there, so they can kind of really drag up, information that's down in the shadows, or even if there's something that's too highlighted, they can take that down. So that's all been quite a learning curve for production designers and art directors in the last sort of 10 years, and especially in the last especially when the Alexa cameras come in widely about 5 years ago. That's really sort of accelerated the whole process. So we know that color casts can be either taken away or introduced, perhaps. Certain colors can even be selected. So if you don't like the kind of red in a certain part of it, you can tone it down. It's a million and one things. Now, the only downside of all of that is that I'm long gone and off the payroll by the time that's all happening, which is part of the way, filmmaking is a very, obviously, collaborative process. And with all of these new technologies, I think we're all leaning a bit on each other as well. So camera people, I have to trust them and they have to trust me, because basically where I put the windows is where they can light, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to post-production, it's quite interesting. At the moment, Legend is doing test screenings, and then it's been sort of finally edited, and then they're going to finish the visual effects on it, and then do a final grade. So Dick Pope, who is nominated for an Oscar for Mr. Turner, he was the DP on it. So we have an email correspondence going on at the moment about certain things. When they come to the very final grading, he's been very kind, and doesn't always happen, but we had a good collaboration, and he's sort of keeping me in as much as he can, not in the detail, but in the overall loop of how that grading is happening. Sometimes we still use bits of cardboard. So this is literally a little cardboard model and a bit of plasticine in the foreground, which ended up looking something like this on a field in Kilruddery, just outside Bray, which we completely destroyed. Actually, we hired the field off the Kilruddery estate, and then promised to put it back and plant it. One of the unusual things I had to do was to make sure that we planted grass seed for the following year, because it was completely full of mud. And again, this you can see the sort of the ability to kind of shoot into the dark here. And I think I am running out of time. This was just a little bit of some of the research that's, of digital cameras. And again, some of the one thing, I'll finish with this. One thing on the Vikings we came across was they didn't have any windows. So there was something, there's also another little theme I wanted to talk about, but running out of time, but maybe I can talk later, or people can question, is, I think every era makes its own interpretation of history, and our stories and films and TV series are just that, interpretations. But once I was looking at all the various sort of research for the Vikings, and think, well, how are we going to shoot without windows? We have doors, is that the only light going in? And then they usually had a sort of a hole in the ceiling to let light through. To let the smoke out. So anyway, we compromise a bit, and we let slats in slats in the walls to let light in, just so there were possibilities to lighting. So we're cheating a bit there, but and also we built in various kind of lighting from the fire pits and stuff like that. I could go on, but I'm being called off. So thank you very much for listening, and talk to you later.